Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Liesl Pereira. I work here at the ACLU of Illinois on our philanthropy and engagement team, and as part of my role here, I work closely with the Next Generation Society. We are so delighted to have you with us tonight for the Next Generation Society Fall Fundraiser. We do have live captions for tonight's event. To turn them on, please click the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. We are gathering tonight during a moment of urgency for our country. And a moment like this gives us the opportunity to reflect on where we've been, where we are, and where we want to be as a nation. The ACLU was born out of a civil liberties crisis when the government arrested and brutalized immigrants exercising their right to free speech. This year marks the centennial anniversary, leading us to think a lot about the undeniable symmetry between the circumstances facing America in 1920 and today. Then, as now, there were unprecedented attacks on civil liberties, often taking the form of violence against those most vulnerable. But for 100 years, we have fought persistently to protect all of us against attacks on our civil liberties. Attacks like the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, police violence against civil rights activists in the 1960s, surveillance and privacy abuses against ordinary Americans after 9/11 under the Patriot Act. Attacks like the Trump administration's relentless and horrific targeting of the most vulnerable members of our society. For 100 years, the ACLU has been unyielding in our efforts to meet these challenges. And with your support, we will continue to persist. We are on the eve of an election that will have an overwhelming impact on what our future looks like. But regardless of the outcome of the 2020 election, we will need to work together to reconstruct the safeguards for our civil liberties and to rebuild our democracy. This year, we are celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Next Generation Society. In just 5 years, we have seen NextGen become such an important part of the ACLU of Illinois. The society has grown, and it is full of engaged and passionate people who are dedicated to building a country that works for all of us. At the ACLU of Illinois, NextGen is family. They are the future leaders and the ones who will continue to carry the mission of the ACLU forward. Their activism, engagement, and support has been inspiring, especially during a time when many of us are looking for ways to feel hopeful. Tonight, you'll hear from the next generation of leaders of this work. I hope that you will feel inspired and determined, because we need your partnership and support to fight for the rights of all, to make the next 100 years more just, fair, and equitable than the last. I hope you enjoy our program this evening and that you will join us for our trivia after party. If you didn't receive an emailed link for trivia at 6 o'clock but would like to play, please email events@aclu-il.org. The email is also in the chat. Now, I'm so happy to hand it off to Nida Ghaffar, President of the Next Generation Society.
Good evening. My name is Nida Ghaffar, President of the ACLU Next Generation Society, and I would like to welcome everyone to the 2020 ACLU Next Generation Society Fundraiser. We understand that all of us are living in a very different world today than we were just 9 months ago. We know how valuable our time is these days, and so on behalf of the NextGen board and the entire ACLU family, I want to thank all of you for joining us virtually for the next hour. I also want to thank our corporate presenting sponsors for their support of tonight's event, Google and the Islamic Food and Nutrition Council of North America. For those of you joining us for the first time tonight, NextGen is a vital part of the ACLU's work today and the foundation for the ACLU's work in the future. 5 years ago, NextGen was founded here in Chicago by a small group of people who wanted to build a network of social, justice-minded, and engaged individuals who contribute to furthering the ACLU's mission. Today, the NextGen Society has grown to over 300 members and 1,500 community members, and attracts people from all backgrounds who share a common commitment to protecting rights for all people, each in our own way, but all equally important. To exemplify the type of engagement the Next Gen Society represents, tonight you will be hearing from a poet about her experiences with immigration in our country. You will have a conversation with the next generation of ACLU leaders and social justice advocates about their work on policing, immigration, and privacy and surveillance. We will also be treated to a performance from a fellow Next Gen board member, and we'll hear about the role that each of us can play in using our voices to make change happen. Tonight is about amplifying the work that the ACLU does day in and day out, recognizing that we all have a collective responsibility in this work, and ensuring that the ACLU has the resources it needs to continue to preserve and advance civil liberties and human rights for all. Thank you all again for supporting this event. We are all stronger when we fight this thing together. So next, I want to introduce Penelope Alegria from the Young Chicago Authors, this year's Chicago Youth Poet Laureate. Penelope is a 3-year member of YCA's artistic apprenticeship, the Bomb Squad, and has performed spoken word at the Metro, Pitchfork Music Festival, and the University of Chicago.
Hi, thank you all so much for having me today. This poem I'm about to read, I wrote when I was 15, and even though it's been 3 years and I've read it countless times, it's a poem I hold very close to my heart. So please enjoy. This poem is called Papa's Deli Order. When my social studies teacher spoke of dreamers and visas, she said undocumented was a synonym for illegal. My hand shot up to tell her she must be mistaken. My parents were undocumented and my papa was no criminal. On weekends, I help him with the deli order at Jewel. I point out verses on posters behind the counter. Yo quiero cuarto de libra de Sara Lee honey turkey. I want a quarter pound of Sara Lee honey turkey. Yo quiero media libra de queso americano. I want a half pound of American cheese. I walk him through each word, but he gets stuck on the R's and the S's. He says he hears English like hissing radio static. But I need him to walk up to the deli counter and order American cheese because criminals don't eat American cheese. When my father is pulled over on 69th Street, passengers huddle in the backseat of his Uber as red stars, blue shirts, and badges float in the gray sky outside. Silhouetted against a city of big shoulders, my father's big shoulders, not against their hissing English. I miss 19 of his calls because I'm at school at debate practice. After the March sun has set, I finally call back, but I'm too late. The passengers have been Ubered by someone else. He sits on the cold concrete curb while policemen hiss radio static, open compartments, turn over seat cushions. All my father hears is car. License. They say exit and he thinks the country. He thinks expired visa. He thinks goodbye hugs and tears at O'Hare and returning to his mother's house in Peru, to the yellow streetlights of the barrio he grew up in. When I finally call back, I want him to put the cops on the phone. I want to tell them he only drives Uber on the weekends, to tell them he's on his way to pick me up, to tell him he can order a pound of American cheese for $1.99 at the deli, and that is important because criminals don't eat American cheese. Instead, I tell my father, yo siempre estoy contigo. Vamos a Panda Express cuando regreses a casa. Podemos conversar sobre pollo de naranja. Let's go to Pan Express when you get home. We can talk about it over orange chicken. But when we go to the deli this weekend, you have to order. ¿Cómo se dice? Dime. He says, I want quarter pound sarali honey turkey. The blue and white lights fade, and he turns the key in the ignition. I want the half-bound cheese American. And under the yellow streetlights of this cold March night, he starts home. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Penelope, for such a beautiful and touching story and for sharing this poem with all of us. I feel like just in these last 13 minutes, I'm already feeling emotional and incredibly inspired to be here with everyone today to join you for this conversation. So with that, my name is Sapna, and I'm an attorney serving as the Advocacy and Policy Counsel in our advocacy team at the ACLU of Illinois. I focus my work on privacy, technology, and surveillance matters across the state. I'm joined here today by two of my amazing colleagues, Liz Jordan, who is a staff attorney with our Police Practices Project, and Ana Torres, who is an attorney and equal justice fellow in our General Civil Liberties Project. I speak for all of us when I say that we are so happy and excited to be here today with all of you, to take a moment in these unprecedented times to celebrate and thank the work of the Next Generation Society. This group is so important to what we do at the ACLU, and we rely on so many of you to help us advocate, reach out to elected officials, and advance our work in the streets and in our society. With so much happening in our country on what seems like an hourly basis, there's so much that we could discuss today. But we're going to be dedicating our time tonight to briefly cover some of the urgent and emerging issues facing our state and the nation at large, while also sharing a slice of the work that we've been doing at the ACLU of Illinois. In just a little over a month, many people will head to the polls to cast their votes in the most important election in our lifetime. But no matter the outcome, I'm going to reiterate what Liesl began with. There is still so much work that we have to do together to ensure that our society lives up to its full potential. As we go through our conversation today, it's important to remember that everyone has a role to play, whether it's taking to the streets and protesting online, calling elected officials, voting, donating, educating yourself, and educating those around you. There's so much that we can all do. We're in the middle of a critical movement of racial justice across the country. The murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd are only two among far too many others that have sparked national protest and a call to action. Last week, the grand jury decision failing to indict the officers in the Breonna Taylor case only further highlights the failures of our existing systems, and we once again saw that justice was not served. With that, I want to begin this conversation with you, Liz. The ACLU has called for a complete reimagining of policing. Can you share a little bit about what that means when it comes to the ACLU's approach to reform here in Illinois, including top policing reform priorities?
Sure, thanks, Sapna. That's right. So our organization nationwide has called for divestment from police departments and reinvestment into other community services and systems that can actually keep us safe and healthy. And practically, that can look a few different ways. So I see them as fitting into kind of three buckets of work. And so the first bucket of work is kind of the more traditional legal-oriented work, challenging unlawful behavior on the part of police officers, challenging prohibited conduct. So this is the type of stuff that is already illegal, but we see happening far too often. So as an example, the Fourth Amendment protects from unreasonable search and seizure, including unlawful stop and frisks. And in Chicago, those were happening on a huge scale. So our office 5 years ago engaged in a stop and frisk agreement, and we've been able to work on reducing the number of stop and frisks that take place in Chicago. Now, there's still a ton of work to be done on that front, but even a reduction of one is one less opportunity for something to go poorly or for someone to be traumatized or worse. So that's kind of one bucket of work that is related to this divestment work. Another bucket is sort of the larger reconfiguration of society, and this is kind of what has dominated the conversation this summer. So police officers currently are tasked with doing all sorts of things in our society that the public is coming out and saying maybe this isn't appropriate. Maybe it's legal. It's not protected stuff under the Constitution, but why is this happening? So why are police officers who've been trained to shoot and kill people the ones who respond when I call for help because my loved one is in crisis? Why are police officers who are trained to arrest people and send them to jail staffed in our schools? So here at the ACLU, we've been able to push for alternatives, like alternative responses to people in crisis through our consent decree work. And also we've been advocating for the removal of police from schools. And so those kind of efforts are done through that sort of long-term consent decree reform work. And then finally, the third bucket is kind of the groundwork, the grassroots, the public hitting the streets, making demands of their politicians, making demands on budgetary line items, things like that. And so we've definitely been actively supporting our partners in our grassroots organization, community clients, things like that, and their advocacy on that level too, particularly as it relates to some of the protests that we've seen this summer.
Thanks, Liz. Even in some of my work on more of the privacy and tech side of things, I've definitely learned a lot about the culture of policing, especially as it relates to the permissive policies that allow police to use a range of technology on everyday people, much of which have resulted in harmful outcomes that disproportionately impact certain communities. And among those are people attending protests, just like you just mentioned, and the technology that's being deployed at these protest sites across the country. But in addition to the tech that we're seeing at protests, we've also seen the deployment of federal troops and a targeting of protesters with violence. How does the ACLU respond to this?
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the most well-known examples of the federal force deployment was in Portland, where we saw Trump's kind of secret police service kidnapping people, essentially disappearing them, if not just abusing them. And the ACLU of Oregon filed suit against those secret police officers, and affiliates across the country were standing ready to do the same if those police officers, military, whatever they were deployed in their locations. And so we were monitoring very closely, ready to challenge that if it happened in Chicago. Fortunately, those federal officers didn't end up being deployed in Chicago, but the Chicago Police Department engaged in similar tactics and really has done tremendous harm to protesters this summer, really since May. In response to outcries from the public, having seen videos of police officers beating people in the head with batons, cracking people's teeth, tear gassing people, in response to hundreds of these videos being seen by the public, our city repeatedly said, "Oh, our police officers exercised restraint. The protesters escalated the violence." And so part of the fight is correcting the historical record, both for our efforts now and for our efforts, 100 years from now. So one of the things that we were able to do, working with our community group clients and our consent decree coalition members like Black Lives Matter Chicago, is that we were able to persuade the independent monitor overseeing the consent decree, as well as the federal judge overseeing the consent decree, to investigate CPD's actions at protests this summer. And that investigation is ongoing. There will be a report issued eventually, but part of that process is that we were able to have 2 days of testimony in federal court this summer, where people who were beaten at protests this summer were able to talk to the federal judge directly and explain what happened to them, and demand, the relief that they believe was necessary. And so these opportunities, shining a light on the reality of what's happening, is kind of the first one of many efforts in correcting that. And we're starting to see, I think, knock on wood at least, those efforts come to fruition, because there were protests last week that thankfully we haven't heard the same amount of response about police violence from. Now, just because people aren't being beaten to the same degree doesn't mean that the risk of harm has been totally eliminated. So physical violence is just one way that people can be targeted and retaliated against. I mean, like you said, Sapna, surveillance and related technology, facial recognition, things like that, are more long-term threats that must be guarded against. So everyone needs to remain very vigilant. I mean, the ACLU has a long history of protecting First Amendment right to protest, and we're doing that through our efforts to stop the violence, but activists need to absolutely make sure that they protect their digital privacy from surveillance efforts.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's a bulk of what my work actually is. And so we are actually in the process of developing some resources to share with folks about this very situation. When you're going to protest, how can you still stay safe? Because this is your information, right? Like, our privacy is supposed to be meant to be sacred, and it's a right that we all have. But it's been really hard to keep it protected when the police and law enforcement agencies have so much more technology than the average person usually even knows about. I didn't even know about most of it until I stepped into this role. So I want to actually highlight a couple of quick go-to suggestions that I usually have for people attending protests and ways for you to keep your privacy safe. And the first one is to cover up. Right now, we have to wear face masks anyway because of COVID-19 as a public health measure, but a face mask is also a great privacy protective measure that we can all take because it'll help cover up a part of your face. And if you add sunglasses to that, a hat, or nondescript clothing, you're gonna help anonymize yourself when you're in the crowd at a protest, making the technology that Liz was just talking about, the facial recognition tech, not really useful because your face won't be able to be recognized. The next thing you can do, which is really important, but really hard to do, is leaving your phone at home. This is really difficult because of safety perspectives. You know, you want to be able to contact people. You want to call the other people you're going to protest with. If anything happens, you're able to call your family or your friends. But at the same time, your cell phone, if you have a smartphone, is one of the easiest ways for you to be tracked by the government, and in this case, by law enforcement. It's through things like your cell signal, your GPS signal, Wi-Fi. These are all signals that are being transmitted that give away your whereabouts. If you can get a burner phone, if you can get a new SIM card for your phone, or if you can just leave your phone at home, that's ideal. If you can't and you have to take your phone with you, put it in airplane mode. That's a huge safety mechanism that we can all adopt if we're going to be at a protest, because that'll keep those signals I was just talking about turned off so that you're not able to be tracked as easily. But at the same time, turn off your biometrics like your Face ID or your Touch ID on your phone. In case anything happens to you, those are really easy ways for someone to just use your thumb to get into your phone. And so you don't want that to be the case. Add a passcode onto your phone to keep it protected. So those are just some things that you can do while you're at a protest. If you're at a protest and you're taking photos or videos of things around you, try to make sure that you're cognizant of what might be in your photo. Are you capturing street signs? Are you getting people's faces? If you are, those are pieces that law enforcement can use to track down who was at a protest. Where was the protest happening? If you do capture photos, try to blur them out or scrub all the images that you might be posting so that any metadata, that's the kind of background hidden data that's attached to your photos, to make sure that's all gone so that you aren't posting any of that online. And those are all ways for people to be able to track what device you were using. And finally, there's a way for us to do that. There's privacy protective apps out there. This was not a reality 10 years ago, but thankfully now there are some companies that are doing work to produce things with a privacy first approach, which means they're thinking about our privacy. They're putting privacy rights at the forefront when they're developing tools for us to use. So take advantage of that. Use a VPN, use a privacy protective browser like Brave, and use a search engine like DuckDuckGo that are more privacy friendly than our standard Safari or Google might be, because they will actually protect your privacy and not keep track of all the sites that you're visiting. And download apps like Signal to talk to folks and message with folks instead of using something like WhatsApp, which is still owned by Facebook. And Signal is actually great because it also has a feature that allows you to set up disappearing messages. So you can actually set it up to where your convos can disappear within 24 hours or within a couple days. That way, if you go to a protest on a Friday night and your phone for some reason gets confiscated on a Sunday, your messages won't even be there for anyone to look at. So that's another great tip. And Signal blurs images, any faces that are in images. So lots of great perks. And like I mentioned, we're actually working on some resources to help share this with you and to share these tools. So keep an eye out for that. But I want to pivot to another area of work that we've been engaged in and bring you in here, Anna. There's been a renewed public outcry around the treatment of immigrants in our country, especially of folks in detention. We hear a lot about immigration issues that happen at the border, such as children in cages, separation of families, the horrifying treatment that immigrants being held in detention facilities are facing, including the most recent reports that has been going on for a while, but is just now getting more reporting on, of forced sterilizations in these detention facilities. So Anna, how has the Trump administration attacked immigrant communities, and what has the ACLU's response been?
Sapna, yourself, but I'll go ahead and answer the question. I think you were about to be finished. Well, yeah, since President Trump took office, his administration has done everything in its power to harass and undermine immigrant communities, especially those that are Black and brown. And not only has President Trump spewed hate through his rhetoric, but also his administration has taken consistent steps to make policies that reflect that. So, you know, some of the things that have happened in the last couple of years is he has used emergency funds to build his wall at the border. We have seen also the Muslim ban, the family separation, forced sterilization lately that we've learned about, and also his constant attacks on sanctuary cities like Chicago, and of course, you know, the dismantling or his attempt to dismantle DACA. And now we also have learned that ICE death, the detainees in detention with ICE, the number of deaths duplicated this year, and mostly it has been due to poor medical treatment at the facilities. So this is of course very concerning, and as you know, the ACLU has really stood up against all of these agents, either through litigation, policy work, or by standing up and supporting our allies in this fight.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. When COVID-19 hit, the ACLU of Illinois also expanded our work and went to court to advocate for the release of medically vulnerable immigrants from detention centers, because we believe that people in government custody are entitled to safe conditions and access to health care everywhere. So Anna, can you tell us a bit about these efforts? I know you were directly involved with a lot of that work. Why was it necessary, the outcome, and how can you see that work continuing during COVID?
Well, when COVID-19 hit, the ACLU National and its affiliates, including the ACLU of Illinois, we jumped right in. We started investigating the conditions in detention centers, particularly focusing on, you know, what were the practices that the detention centers were engaging in, especially now with the pandemic. And based on the terrible things that we learned about the conditions in detention facilities, we launched a unified plan against these facilities and against ICE. Throughout the country, the ACLU has filed around 60 lawsuits seeking the release of medically vulnerable detainees who are at high risk of serious illness and death if they were to contract COVID-19. Here in Illinois, our office also followed suit. We spoke before going into action. We did our research. We spoke with dozens of detained immigrants in different detention centers around Illinois, and we learned about the unsanitary and unsafe conditions in which they lived, the lack of correct medical care that people who are sick and who have medical conditions that make them vulnerable are simply not getting, and how these detention facilities were simply not following CDC guidelines on how to best, on best practices for these types of facilities so that they can protect the people who are inside. For example, some of the things that we learned is that, people were just too crowded in the detention centers. They couldn't really social distance. They didn't have access to face masks. They didn't even have access to constant constant supply of free soap. So they couldn't really wash their hands as often as they should. Just in general, the conditions were just poor. And through litigation, we sought the release of a lot of people, about a dozen people who were sick and who were especially vulnerable because of these conditions and to COVID. And every single person that we've been able to get out of the detention facilities has been an amazing victory. And it has been an incredible experience as a young litigator to be part of that movement and to be part of this type of effort. But unfortunately, we have not been able to get everybody out. And that's mainly because we're battling against a system, a very unfriendly system that takes, for example, the word of a warden to be more valuable than the word of dozens of unified voices of immigrants or of experts, medical experts that have, spoken out about these issues. So this is the state that we are in right now, where we do the best that we can and we fight zealously, but we're unable to win every battle, unfortunately. And how about you, Sapna? How else are state actors responding to COVID in your area? Is there any impact on privacy rights?
Yeah, we definitely have seen that. We've seen that, decision makers in the state are really making an effort to combat the spread of COVID-19, which is great. That's what we need to do right now. And so they've been getting creative with the tools that they're using. And one of those is the, ability to it does have an impact on our privacy rights because it's something that we call contact tracing. You've probably seen the term contact tracing pop up on your news feeds, which this is basically just the process of working backwards from someone who's tested positive for a disease, in this case, COVID-19, and figuring out who else they may have come in contact with and exposed to the disease. Contact tracing is a proven public health tool that's been used to help contain a number of other diseases and infections in the past. And right now, the way that folks are being creative with it is that they're wanting to incorporate technology. But any place technology goes, so does our privacy and the possibility of our privacy rights being infringed. So we began to focus some of our work on the possible privacy implications of contact tracing programs. And we drafted a series of resources that would highlight the need to adopt a privacy first or privacy protective approach to contact tracing and identifying ways for anyone developing or considering adoption of contact tracing to make sure that it's privacy protective. And the big reason why we kind of focused in on that work is because even though contact tracing has been around for a long time, in the past, we've always seen a manual approach being used where people would make calls and the public health department would make the calls and get information about where you've been, who you may have come in contact with. With technology coming into it, we're now seeing our phones being the way to do the tracing. So a number of different programs are being proposed, not just here in Illinois, across the country, across the world, where it would utilize different types of technology from your GPS signal, Wi-Fi signal, cell signal to track your location and do the contact tracing, or using your Bluetooth signal. That raises a number of concerns for us because not everyone has a smartphone, but even if everyone had a smartphone, to be tracking everywhere we go, it's not something that we want the government to have. We don't want them to have this data about us. So we've developed a number of resources that are actually available on our website, and I can share a link to them, that include guidance for decision makers in the government outlining exactly what principles you need to adopt to make sure that anything that you do for contact tracing keeps our privacy rights in mind and protects it, because it's really easy to do both. And if you're going to use technology, to make sure that technology doesn't take over the resources or funds that are needed right now to address the public health challenge and to invest in public health needs first. And then once we've addressed the public health needs, then you can look at what technology might work, how to make it privacy protective, and to make sure that you never roll out something that's collecting data that we don't know where it's going to go. We don't know how it's going to be stored. We don't know how it's going to be deleted. So that information is available on our website. And we've also created a number of tools for the public and engaged with community organizations and connected with other public health allies to share this information, to make sure that the word gets out everywhere, and to keep us up to date on what people are seeing, what they're hearing, to make sure that this entire process, the rollout and the implementation of contact tracing, remains privacy protective. Since we're nearing the end of our time, though, I want to just take a quick moment to thank everyone for being here. And I want to give Liz and Anna some time to share a quick call to action with everyone. Liz and Anna, can you quickly share something that folks in attendance today can do to continue advocating and advancing for change?
I would say from my perspective, the most critical thing is to stay civically engaged and to not be intimidated by the violence on the part of the police, to not be intimidated by these retaliation efforts. Everyone keeps saying that these are unprecedented times, which is like my favorite ironic phrase now. But the precedented times weren't that great either. I would love to see us get to unprecedentedly good times where we've never been freer, we've never been safer, more able to thrive. The only way that we can get there is if we use the tools at our disposal to keep fighting for it in the streets or however you feel most comfortable.
So for me, I would just remind everyone to be mindful that this upcoming election, we're not just voting for our president, but we also have the opportunity to vote for our judges. And that is also very, very important. Paying attention to who we vote for is very important. And there are more than 60 candidates that are seeking retention or office this election year. So just make sure to do your homework right before you go to the polls or vote by mail. Research the judges. There are many websites that provide information and recommendations from bar associations and they let you know whether a specific bar association recommends or doesn't recommend a specific judge. And those are really, really important. So there are even websites that just compile all of that information for you and compile all of the recommendations in one website and make it easy for you to figure out who you will vote for. And just take that little printout to the polls, or take that printout next to your computer or next to your desk where you're gonna vote by mail. Make sure to do that. And of course, for those who are not able to vote, just make sure to educate your family and friends, make sure they register, and make sure that you also pass on this information. And if necessary, do the homework for them or do it with them so that we can actually seize the moment and seize the opportunity to vote for better judges who actually make a lot of decisions locally.
Thanks so much, you two. I echo everything that my colleagues have said. The only thing I would add specific to your privacy is that your privacy matters. This is information about you that we're talking about. It's not just a commodity or a currency or a tool that can be used by the government or by companies. So demand more from your legislators and these companies to protect these rights. Make the calls, tweet the tweets, make the change that we need to see, and tell people that this is what privacy is. Educate folks and try to adopt those technologies that I'm mentioning that are a bit more privacy protective, so we can send that message that we do know what privacy is, we do care about it, and look, we're making an active change to opt for those companies that are making more privacy protective apps for us and tech for us. And the last thing I'll say is, as a member of the advocacy team at the ACLU, I want to share that, hopefully you will continue to support us in our advocacy efforts, because we're going to look to you for help. An action that everyone can do is to check the emails that we send out. When we send out ways to get involved and enact change, help us. Call the legislators that we're pushing. Tell them to support the bill you believe in, and take action when the opportunity comes your way. Even if you think it's small, I promise you it's not. It means a lot. And by being here today, you've already demonstrated your commitment to civil rights and civil liberties. And on behalf of everyone at the ACLU of Illinois, I want to thank you for that and for all the work that you do. Since that's all the time that we have today, I just want to thank you again for being here. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at the events@aclu-il.org email. And I'm now going to turn things back over to Nida, who is our Next Generation Society Board President. Thank you again, Anna and Liz, for joining me today.
Thank you, Liz, Sapna, and Anna, for your insightful conversation. I was actually taking notes during it, and I'm going to be downloading some of those apps later tonight, so thank you all again. As a child of immigrants, my parents came to this country with the expectation that if we just worked hard, we would succeed. But the path to success would not even be a possibility for me if it were not for the pioneers that fought for my rights in the generations that preceded me. As the first in my family to venture into the field of law, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a profound effect on me. I would not be able to practice law at a firm if it were not for her. I wouldn't be paid the same as my male colleagues if it were not for her. I have the ability to have a family without the fear of losing my job because of her. I have never felt so deeply saddened by the loss of someone I have never met, but that's because she had such an impact on this country. I am able to live the life I lead because of her sacrifices. I'm sure my experience is not unique, as I'm sure she had the same effect on many of us here tonight. Justice Ginsburg was one of the founders of the Women's Rights Project at the ACLU. She fought for our right to work, our reproductive freedom, and for the right to make our own financial decisions. We are living in a time where these rights, among so many others, are challenged on a daily basis, sometimes hourly basis. We are exhausted from fighting to keep our basic human rights, to protect our Black and Brown communities, and to ensure that we have a fair election on November 3rd. And unfortunately, the issues we are fighting for today are not new. We are not the first generation who has had to fight to prevent police brutality, to make signs that say, "My body, my choice," or to take to the streets to demand the change we need to see in the world as we march chanting, "Black Lives Matter." But we should feel comforted in the fact that the work that we are doing today, the ACLU has been doing for the past 100 years. As you'll often hear at an ACLU event, the ACLU has been here long before our current president and will remain long after. The ACLU has been working hard in the courts, in the legislature, and throughout our communities, which has been even more critical during this pandemic, to make the promise of our Constitution real for everyone, not just a select few. I joined the ACLU just after the last election, when I felt powerless and unsure about our future in this country. We had just voted in a president who didn't want me or my family in this country, who told me to go back to where I came from when I was born right here in Chicago. And instead of being angry all the time, I decided I wanted to be part of something that was going to make a real difference. Because if we don't speak up about inequality, it will normalize, and we are all affected. When NextGen was founded 5 years ago, few could have envisioned the shocking assaults on civil rights and liberties that we are seeing in our country today. Violence against peaceful protesting, unparalleled attempts to undermine our right to vote, and the misuse of our trusted institutions, just to name a few. But NextGen members then and now realized that the next generation of engaged citizens would have to be vigilant to protect our most cherished rights. And as you heard from Liesl earlier, the Next Generation Society has become so important to the ACLU here in Illinois. Society members take action in so many ways, by giving money, by engaging their elected officials, by finding as many ways to make their voice heard as possible. Together, we work hard to make sure that the ACLU has the resources it needs to take on these important fights. A few years ago, the Next Generation Society decided they wanted to impact a significant piece of the ACLU's work by creating the Freedom Fund. We are currently in the third year of this 5-year campaign to raise $1 million in support of the ACLU. And we are so grateful to everyone who has already supported us. Each year, throughout this fundraising, the Next Gen Society is able to fully fund a staff attorney at the ACLU of Illinois. The money raised through this fund will sustain the society and build a foundation of growth into the future, ensuring that we are creating a legacy that speaks to our belief in the ACLU's work. Tonight, you heard from some of the ACLU's bright young leaders. I hope that their words encourage you to join us in investing in their work. We understand that asking to give even a small amount of money during this very difficult year is a very big ask. But know that every dollar helps the ACLU continue to fight on. If you can, we ask that you please donate. You can use text to give by texting the word ACLU to the number 243-725. Your gift will support the work that you heard about tonight and so much more. The ACLU's fight for the rights of the most vulnerable in our communities and to make sure that the ACLU is here for us when we really need them. Please consider making a donation and joining us in supporting this work. The information to give is also in the chat function in the Zoom chat. To end our program tonight, I am extremely excited to introduce Ari Afsar, a singer, songwriter, and storyteller. Ari is formerly of Chicago's Hamilton and is the creator and composer of Jeanette, a musical about the first woman elected to Congress. Most meaningfully to all of us, she is a board member of the Next Gen Society and has supported the work of the ACLU through a number of creative avenues. Please welcome Ari Afsar.
I'm getting emotional. What an incredible, amazing, educational evening. It is such an honor to be here with every single one of you and to share the stage, virtual stage, with some incredible folks. Thank you for that awesome introduction. My name is Ari Afsar, ACLU Illinois Next Gen Society board member since 2017. I opened the Chicago production of Hamilton as Eliza a month before the 2016 election, and it completely changed how I saw my art and my activism. I am Bangladeshi, and after the travel ban in 2017, I knew that I needed to do something bigger than what I was currently doing. So I emailed the ACLU. I did a cold email and I said, how can I help? What can I do? How can I use my small platform for something bigger? And honestly, selfishly, I needed to surround myself with badass women leaders. And because of the incredible opportunities, because of the beautiful minds and educational tools, the ACLU opened in me something that had been there all along that I didn't realize. And it was using art for social change. I believe that art and policy go hand in hand. The way that we can change policy is to change culture, and the way that we change culture is through great art. So I'm honored to be a Next Gen board member society, and I'm even more honored to continuously be learning and educating myself and being surrounded by people who are so action forward. That's the word that we keep hearing, action, action, action. And that's what the ACLU is and does and has continued to do. I'm composing this musical about Jeanette Rankin, who was the first female identifying Congress member to be elected into Congress 4 years before the ratification of the 19th Amendment, giving white women the right to vote. She was also the vice president of the ACLU. It's so crazy how everything is just interconnected. And so I am grateful for women like her. I am grateful for people like you who are continuing to do the work. And I'm excited that we are all connected to do the work and fight and vote. we keep seeing this, and we all know this is important, but I don't think it can be ever said too many times. If you are an eligible voter, make sure that you are registered. Make sure 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, make sure that you are registered and you have a voting plan that accommodates your needs. We heard this earlier. Make sure that every loved one in your life, your friends, your families, your neighbors, they have a voting plan. As we know that you can vote by mail now until Election Day. You can visit a voting poll location for early voting, or you can actually vote on Election Day. I think so many times we're told over and over again that our vote doesn't matter, that our voice doesn't matter. And sometimes we feel super helpless that we can't do anything. Broadway, in my shoes, is completely shut down. My industry is gone as we know it. But I believe that no matter what field, what industry you are in, if we collaborate, if we work together, if we take up space and have our voice and our vote be heard, we can see a better future. And I am grateful to be a part of the ACLU to make that reality. This song I'm going to be singing is the closing number of We Won't Sleep, of Jeanette, which is called We Won't Sleep. And I am so excited to be sharing it with you all today, hoping that we can remember the words, that together we can make a new reality. We've been trying, woman, a child, could make it easy, could live in denial. We saw the world end, but it keeps spinning, whether we're losing, whether we're winning. Then they start to fade while we're wide awake and feeling alive. Been staying up late, cause we know the stakes of losing the light. We won't sleep, they'll try to get us, but we gon' reach out for love. We won't sleep, no, not till it's over, even with the blurry eyes. Baby, we won't compromise. I dreamed in color when I was younger, painted a picture, one hand in the other. Now I see shadows outside my window, but I won't close them, no, not when we know that they start to fade. While we're wide awake and feeling alive. Been staying up late, cause we know the stakes of love and the light. We won't sleep, they'll try to get us, but we gon' reach out for love. We won't sleep, no, not till it's over, even with the blurry eyes. Baby, we won't compromise. Talking for the pride, say we got no time, though the feeling's gonna rise. It's not too late to realize we can be the first, not be fooled by words. So we gotta learn how to wake up and change the world. We won't sleep, they'll try to get us, but we gon' reach out for love. We won't sleep, no, not till it's over, even with the blurry eyes. Baby, we won't compromise. We won't sleep, no, no, even with the blurry eyes. We won't sleep, they'll try to get us, but we gon' reach out for love. We won't sleep, no, not till it's over, even with the blurry eyes. Baby, we won't compromise.
Thank you so much, Ari. That was wonderful. I always love hearing you sing. And thanks to all of you who have joined us this evening. We are so excited to kick off our trivia portion of the night. For those of you who signed up, you should have received an email with the link for trivia. Please click the Zoom link and the Twitch link to be able to join. We have been absolutely overwhelmed with the awesome response from all of you guys. But just a reminder for those of you who didn't have their phone next to them earlier when I mentioned it, you can use text to give by texting the word ACLU to the number 243725. It will take a few minutes to put everyone into their trivia group, so we ask that you please be patient with us. We'll start the trivia game as soon as everyone logs in and gets into their team's breakout sessions. And if you did not receive the link for trivia but would like to play, please email events@aclu-il.org, and that email address is also going to go into the chat right now. So thank you again for joining us tonight. We are so grateful for your support, and everyone tonight. Have a really wonderful evening.